Association's Appellate Practice Section and our program today on the appeal of social media. We are excited to have a panel of social media appellate trailblazers, and we're going to leave time for questions at the end, so please be sure to log into your YouTube account to ask any questions you may have in the chat. And if you have to miss any portion of today's program, or if you joined late, you can always watch it again using the same link. I'm going to introduce our moderator for today, for today's panel, and then she will introduce our speakers. So we have Whitney Briack, who is a shareholder with the Houston law firm of Boyer Miller. Her practice focuses on Texas State Court Appeals and commercial litigation. She previously worked for the 14th Court of Appeals as a briefing attorney for Justice Bill Boyce and as a staff attorney for Justice Sharon McCalley. And she's served on the HBA's Appellate Section Council since 2017. Currently, she serves as our section speakers chair. So Whitney, with that, could you please jump in and introduce our panelists?
Thank you, Meredith. So for everybody who's joining, whether you're a follower of hashtag appellate Twitter or not, you're, I'm sure, familiar with the faces on the screen today. They're real life leaders in the Texas appellate community, in addition to being our Twitter heroes. So we're grateful to have them here today. Appreciate you joining us on this entertaining topic about kind of the intersection between appellate practice and social media. First up, we've got Carl Cesari. He runs his own firm, Cesari PC, in Dallas, Texas. He's handled appeals in courts, though, from across the country, worked extensively in the Supreme Court on issues running the gamut from constitutional law to administrative law, statutory construction. He's worked on cutting-edge cases involving net neutrality, anti-terrorism, gun control, environmental law, intellectual property, extraterritoriality, which I think he threw in just to make sure I could pronounce it. And foreign sovereign immunity, a bunch of very important cutting edge matters. He's represented companies, entrepreneurs, senators, senior agency heads, scholars, and as he puts it, everyday folks too. Then next up we have Kendall Hanks. She's a shareholder in the Austin office of Greenberg Traurig. She's an experienced appellate advocate who represents clients throughout the country in state and federal forums, including high stakes business disputes and test cases involving constitutional rights, trade secrets, and similarly important issues. In 2011, she was elected to the American Law Institute, which is one of the highest honors in the legal profession. And we know her as one of the founding members of the handle @LadyLawyerDiary and the hashtag #LadyLawyerDiaries, which we'll talk about more in a bit. And then we, of course, have Rafi Melkonian, who is a partner at Wright, Close, and Barger here in Houston. He practices in federal and state appellate courts in the country. He's a 2005 graduate of Harvard Law School and a former law clerk of Judge Jennifer Walker Elrod on the Fifth Circuit. Most importantly for today, he tweets from the appellate about appellate practice from the handle @RM Fifth Circuit. So you can find him there. And I'll add that in addition to briefing and arguing dozens of cases across the country, he recently argued and won a case before the U.S. Supreme Court in 2019, a unanimous decision in favor of his client, and is in fact considered the dean of the hashtag appellate Twitter. So I will turn it over to him to talk a little bit about the history of that hashtag and the appellate Twitter community in general.
Well, thank you for that super kind introduction. The hashtag appellate Twitter story is not one of planning or contemplation. I joined Twitter in around 2016, and I was getting into appellate practice full time. And my idea was, well, appellate practice is mostly a solitary job. I'm at a firm where most of us do appeals, but nonetheless, most of the time I'm sitting in an office by myself thinking and reading about law. These days, obviously, I'm sitting at my house thinking and reading about law, and there really is no direct interaction with my colleagues. But I thought, okay, how am I going to meet appellate lawyers around the country? And so it occurred to me that Twitter was where a lot of professionals were showing up. The journalists were there. There were a lot of other kinds of professionals I was finding there. So I thought, okay, why don't I look for appellate lawyers? And maybe I can talk to them and learn something about this practice that I want to do. I found a small group in DC that had sort of coalesced. Obviously, Washington, DC is one of the centers of appellate practice in our country, especially because the Supreme Court's there. And they were taking one of our colleagues and friends from Dallas, Jason Steed, out to barbecue in DC. I don't know why they were taking him to barbecue in DC. We have good barbecue here in Texas, but nonetheless, that's what they were doing. And I felt super left out because I was like, aha, here are the people, but I am not there. So I tweeted sort of a sad tweet about that, and I added the hashtag appellate Twitter to the end, entirely, out of my head. I didn't think about it or anything. I just wrote the first thing that came to mind. And for whatever reason, it seemed to hit a nerve. It's still here 4 years later, totally beyond my expectation. And I think it's partly something about what I said at the beginning, which is that appellate lawyers often work, alone, but we also love to talk about our craft. We love to talk about this practice that most of us really like. And so it's an opportunity to do that in a way that's not limited by geography or the happenstance of who you can take to lunch. I can talk to appellate lawyers in Oregon or New York or Florida or anywhere else. So that's where I've been doing social media for the last 4 years, on Twitter, mostly using the hashtag appellate Twitter to sort of organize my thoughts and discussions on appeals.
And Carl, what about you? How did you?
I want to break in just to add a little to about what Rafi said, because it's sort of amazing how successful appellate Twitter has become. I mean, there have been news articles about it and things like that. Like, it's really exploded, and it's not just a credit to, I think, the need, the fact that there really is this desire for appellate lawyers to congregate and talk and have their own water cooler conversations about appellate law, but also because Rafi is an awesome human being, and he sort of guides it, and like he's really made it. He's really put his own stamp on the personality of the hashtag and the community by doing what he did. And I came to Twitter when I started my own practice, and I think out of a similar felt feeling from Rafi that I was by myself, and I wanted to get noticed, and I wanted to meet the people in the community who were appellate lawyers, and I didn't have anyone to talk to at all during the day except the walls. And so it was really cool to just jump on appellate Twitter and get to know people. And I've had amazing conversations with people all across the country, and it's really facilitated my practice because, as Whitney was saying, I do a lot of work in the U.S. Supreme Court. And it's weird to do it from the provinces out in Dallas. All the appellate lawyers who practice in the Supreme Court practically are in DC. So interacting with those folks was hard to do until Twitter, and then it became really easy. The world became extremely flat, and it was incredible. It helped me develop my practice, and we meet really amazing mentors and friends, and it's just a phenomenal opportunity.
Kendall, what about you?
Oh gosh, I've told this story before, but I came to social media kicking and screaming. I had zero interest for all the reasons that, we talk about a lot on these programs. I was concerned about the public exposure. I'm at a big firm. I'm people who know me, I'm fairly political in my personal views, which are quite different from, what my regular practice is like very often. And the only reason I ended up getting on Twitter was because I was doing a presentation. I was moderating a panel that I put together for 12 years for the American Bar Association in Washington, D.C. on the U.S. Supreme Court. And I don't think that was, we've had Neil Katchel and Greg Katzis before he went on the court, and some really amazing speakers. And so it drew some attention, some media attention. And Bloomberg was live tweeting it. And one of my colleagues said, hey, you get on Twitter. They're live tweeting your panel. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to get on Twitter. And I did. And of course, he had used the hashtag appellate Twitter. I think this was in this had to have been in late 2016, maybe November of 2016. So not long after Rafi, was doing his thing, and I stumbled on this community of lawyers who, many of whom I knew, many of whom I had heard of by reputation but hadn't really interacted with, who were talking about things, who were following cases as they came out and analyzing decisions and being extremely vocal about things like Oxford commas and spacing and fonts and really engaging in a productive, civil, professional, friendly community kind of way. And I've been very fortunate to work at firms that have pretty sizable appellate groups. I was at Haynes and Boone, and now I'm at Greenberg, and I love those communities, but it can be a very insular practice, and it is nice to sort of feel like there's a broader community. And this was more than just Texas; it was sort of national, and so I got sucked into it, and here we all are.
I think I joined Twitter to complain about Comcast, like in 2007, and then let my account sit idle for years and years, and then, got back on to follow news coverage or something, and then just managed to find my way into appellate Twitter. But it's a great community. What before we talk more about that, what about other social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook? What are you guys using? What do you see other people using?
I'll dispense with that quickly. I'm on LinkedIn because I think you need to be, because I think there are people who post articles that will tag you, and particularly bigger law firms. So I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm not particularly active unless there's, something I've written or an announcement that I'll post. I am not on Facebook. And I apologize to all my Houston friends. I love all of you, and I've seen like the friend requests, but I am not on Facebook, so it's not you. Twitter's really the only social media that I engage in.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that, this is probably my spiciest take of the day, which is that I think Facebook is useless for the purposes of generating business or becoming more well-known as a lawyer in Texas or anywhere else. There is like this huge Texas lawyers Facebook group that I know there's a lot of discussions on there. I occasionally would go look at it and just confirm my belief that it's useless. I don't see the value in it. That's not to say that other people can't be successful on there in terms of improving their, profile around Texas and whatnot. But I haven't seen how to do it. I think it's not the way to do it. Having said that, LinkedIn, the one thing I'll say about that, I agree with Kendall that you have to be on it just as sort of a matter of course. But the other thing is maybe it's a good way for someone who's very social media shy to dip their toe in all this. Because there's a little bit of interaction, but there's not as much interaction as Twitter, clearly, and it's much safer. You're very unlikely to get into huge trouble.
Just totally happens on Twitter.
Maybe you end up with a financial advisor you didn't want who is on there. But other than that, the sort of social media pounding that you can take if you make a mistake on there is not likely to happen.
And I think I'm similar. I had a Facebook account I kind of, kept for social purposes, seeing friends, vacation pictures and kid pictures and stuff like that. But I never really got any professional feedback from it, and I never really intended to make use of it that way. LinkedIn right now substitutes for my website because I don't really have a website, but I don't really do much with it. I do agree with Rafi that it is a way for people to use success. You can use it successfully to develop your practice. I just sort of found the boundaries that Rafi was mentioning kind of constraining. That is, what's fun about Twitter, and it fits my personality, is getting the interaction. You do face the risk of getting a pounding for doing so. But at the same time, otherwise you're just sort of putting stuff out there in the universe, and then you get this weird, you can get a clap or a like or something. And I don't know what that means, and I don't understand that. So it just didn't fit right. But I do agree that it is possible to make use of it in a really useful way.
I realized I'd sort of forgotten, and I won't get into details, but a true story about LinkedIn. A lawyer I know had written an article about a particular subject, posted that subject on LinkedIn, and happened to be connected from law school to a lawyer who was in-house, who was dealing with that issue, and called about that issue as when they were currently dealing with it in litigation. So I don't think that happens very often, but it does happen. So particularly if you're working on substantive matters, I think LinkedIn is a great platform to post links to what you're working on. And I think that the people who do, pop in and out of LinkedIn, they see that, and you never know. I mean, it's just like any other business development, making people aware of what you're working on, what your expertise is. It does happen.
Yeah, I've started writing a newsletter about the Fifth Circuit for the last few months that comes out once a week or sometimes every 2 weeks, depending on how busy I am. And I put that on LinkedIn. And that gets some interaction on LinkedIn that it does not on Twitter from people who are usually more senior and aren't on Twitter or don't feel comfortable there. And so I found that sort of thing, exactly like Kendall was saying, to be quite useful. But in terms of interaction, it's not the right place.
And to add one more caveat, I've got a similar kind of experiment that I run, because I post my Supreme Court briefs on Twitter, and I also post them on LinkedIn. I get a lot more interaction, people talking about the substance of the briefs. And I've had a few clients come to me about briefs through Twitter. I haven't had any direct interaction with people through LinkedIn, but it's interesting that, if you look at the little metrics and stuff, the briefs get circulated very, very widely, way outside my own personal network. They get circulated into, oftentimes if I'm writing an amicus brief, inside the companies that are at issue. So it kind of does reach a really high level, although it's sort of sitting out there in nowheresville. So yeah, I recently wrote a brief in the Google versus Oracle case, and it went right into the GC offices of Google and Oracle. And I was like, that's pretty interesting. But I didn't.
It sounds like brief tracing. This is brilliant.
It's I guess the metrics are a little bit better on. I don't really follow the metrics. I don't really understand them on Twitter. But I do like to see where my brief goes in LinkedIn, because you can kind of tell, it's pretty interesting.
It's very cool.
So what other ways, in addition to those that you've mentioned already, are you guys using either LinkedIn, Twitter, or other online platforms to build your practices and develop more business?
I'll sort of refer back to a refrain that Rafi started with. This was not sort of a deliberate plan. It's not like I put together a Twitter business plan. It's a very organic thing. I mean, I will tell you where it's had an impact on my practice personally, and I don't know if it's the same for Rafi and Carl. If you do it well and you do it responsibly, and you're authentic, I think authenticity it's a double-edged sword, but I also think it's very important. It really increases your profile. I have been in courthouses in other states where people have said, "Oh my gosh, Kendall Hanks, like you're the Lady Lawyer Diary person, the appellate Twitter person," and like judges have done that, and it's astonishing to me that people actually would recognize me just from Twitter, but it has definitely happened. Invitations to programs like this, which is, it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to colleagues in Houston and to be a part of an appellate community that comes together like this. A very specific example is, and this kind of goes to authenticity. I'm a big fly fishing advocate, and I'm on the board of an organization that works with veterans. It's called Project Healing Waters. We use fly fishing to help veterans rehab. And fly fishing is a big part of my life, not right now, unfortunately, because of COVID, but And I have a thread called Fly Fishing Lessons, and it's fly fishing lessons for litigators and for life, whatever. And someone who follows me, who was on the ABA litigation journal, is editing it, wanted to turn that into an article, and that became one of the feature pieces in the ABA litigations last. That never would have happened. That never would have happened. Now, is that going to turn into an enormous case? I don't know, but I will say, an assistant GC from one of my clients, it had been sent to him because he likes to fly fish, and he reached out and said, wow, I read your article, I thought it was really wonderful. A lot of the stuff you say to me now makes a lot more sense. So I think profile, particularly appellate community, it's, having a reputation as an appellate practitioner, is important, and I think Twitter has increases that. And substantively, I mean, if you spend a week on just following Twitter, particularly when the courts are releasing opinions in Texas and the US Supreme Court during the terms, I mean, there is an enormous community of really brilliant lawyers and academics and reporters who are going back and forth about the decisions as they're coming out. And it's not just coverage. There's plenty of coverage in the media. It's an engagement. There's discussion about the issues and about, what's being decided and the consequences for other cases. So from a substantive perspective, it has really benefited my ability to stay up to date on what's happening in the courts where I practice and the courts that I care about.
If I can go next, I guess. Let me talk about what I do that I think helps my practice, and then maybe how it turned into a really cool consequence, and maybe that'll be illustrative. So one thing I realized as I was getting into Twitter is that there is not a lot of granular focus on the federal courts of appeals. There's super granular focus on the Supreme Court because of the high profile. But just people who read day in, day out every single opinion of the Fifth Circuit or the Third Circuit or whatever circuit, there's not a lot of people who do that. There are a few, and there's some excellent examples, like David Cole handles the Fifth Circuit with a great blog here in Texas. But there was definitely an opening there. And so what I decided to do was just what I just said, literally read every Fifth Circuit civil appeal, whether published or unpublished. And I look at almost every order issued by the Fifth Circuit, which in the Supreme Court world is called sort of the shadow docket. In other words, orders without, reasoning, essentially. But you don't use that fancy phrase for the Fifth Circuit. But, I read all the, I know what they're doing about extensions of time. I know what they're doing about mandamus. I know what they're doing with respect to motions to seal appellate briefs. And I just started talking about that. And there is a market of other practitioners, including trial practitioners, which are our main customers after all, to learn that, A, I can learn something about this. And B, there's this person out there who really does nothing but think about this sort of minutiae of how the Fifth Circuit works. So that's what I decided to do. And I my whole plan, if I have any, which I mostly don't, is to burrow myself deeper and deeper into that niche. In terms of the consequences, I mean, there's a lot, and I can talk about this for, almost limitless amounts of time. But if I could talk about the Supreme Court case that I had, totally by happenstance last year, I think it had two really big consequences there. One is I think the Twitter presence and the fact that I was able to reach Supreme Court practitioners through Twitter gave me the self-confidence to say, like, look, I'm going to do it. You come under a lot of pressure as a non-Supreme Court practitioner when your cert petition is granted to give up the case, to someone who does this all the time. And, as an ethical matter, maybe in a lot of circumstances you should do that because you want to give your client the best possible representation. But I felt like because of what I'd done, by talking to all these Supreme Court people, really learning about it, that I could handle it. And, with the support of our firm, I was able to do that. And of course, we had some Supreme Court lawyers to help us. But in terms of the argument, I did that and it went fine. And so I don't think that would have happened. had I not been on Twitter. In terms of like a more fun aspect of that, I got tremendous support during that whole Supreme Court process. I would post my preparation on Twitter. For example, I posted myself standing in front of a cardboard box pretending to give the argument, and that was immediately turned into like a hilarious series of memes by some of my friends on Twitter that I still cherish. I've got them in my office. But also, when I got to DC, there were people there to greet me. There was a huge turnout at my argument, which was amazing. There was a party afterwards where counsel from both sides came. So all of these things were an unbelievable side effect of the Twitter community that none of that would have happened had I not been on social media. So I think there's a lot of business-oriented stuff that happens on Twitter, and it's great. But there's also just personal things that are terrific to experience.
I want to add to what Rafi just said, because he's being a little humble about this, which is no surprise if you know Rafi. One of the best things on Appellate Twitter in the last couple of years is Rafi like documented, sort of narrated his whole preparation process for that Supreme Court argument. He talked about his moots. He talked about how he was preparing, about what he was scheduling, what his plan was. And it was remarkable. I mean, it was, if you can find that thread from Rafi, when he was getting ready for that Supreme Court argument, it was just fantastic.
I think you turned it into an article for something, right, Rafi?
I did. I just published an article in the same journal Kendall had her fly fishing.
Oh, that's right. That's what it was. Same thing. Yeah. So same sort of idea, right?
Exactly right.
I thought that was really cool too. And I also want to add that Rafi knocked his argument out of the park when he did it. And it was very cool. I was in the court for it, and it was really cool. Like, I think that's another thing that's really fun about appellate Twitter is you're sort of watching a bunch of other lawyers who are on the same path, going about it their own ways, and you see them develop, and we get to share our successes, and we get to dwell on our losses together, and it's really cool because other lawyers don't quite have the kind of experience that we do. I mean, we have losses and wins all the time, so they're kind of ups and downs. On a weekly basis, you can be in the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And it's really great to be able to experience that with a community of other people who are similar. As for my own kind of use of Twitter, I'm less interested in the substantive things. Like, I really like to pile on to what other people are doing. Like Rafi, I don't really have a focus like that of my own. What I like to do is to try and take the Twitter world and then turn it into the real world. So I sort of get to know people on Twitter and then go and visit them, because part of what I wanted to do with my practice was to make it not I like Texas practice and I do a lot of Texas appeals, but I wanted to have a national focus. So instead of investing in a fancy office and standing desks and all that sort of stuff, I decided to invest in travel. And so my travel schedule is dictated by my friends on Twitter and new people I meet. I go to California and go meet them. I'll go to New York and meet people and go to DC. Spend a lot of time in DC. And, the appellate community is small. You can get to know everybody, and things flow from that that are really cool. So that's kind of what I've done with it. And, it's gotten me in touch with the absolute pinnacle of the Supreme Court bar and securities bars in New York. It's really, really flattens the world. It makes it extremely easy to develop really meaningful, relationships with people all over the country very easily.
Just to jump off on that a little bit, when Carl posts one of his amicus briefs, the reaction to those briefs are often amazing. Like, people will retweet them hundreds of times to say how good they are, which they are. And he gets so much positive feedback from just the simple act of putting up his brief and maybe excerpting some of the key moments. And then, of course, Carl was just talking about how he can convert that into personal context, which is amazing. But you'd be surprised, just this act of posting a PDF will sometimes have these amazing effects.
And that's something I think is interesting too, is that it facilitates a kind of discussion that can't really exist in the real world, where you're like 20 or 30 people are piling on a brief and being like, oh, like this, oh, this is stupid, you're an idiot. But like that, you can't, nobody does that. Nobody sits in a conference room and dissects a brief. So you can learn a tremendous amount. You know, I say that there are two audiences for my brief. I mean, really three audiences for my brief. One was my mother, because she read all of my briefs. One was the justices, of course, and their clerks. But there's also Twitter. And I feel like it's improved my writing to see where you get feedback and say, oh, that was really cool. And then see, you know, and there is a pipeline, again, thanks to Rafi, like journalists are watching what happens on Twitter. So you'll write an amicus brief and it'll have a little ditty in it. And that shows up in an article on Bloomberg or New York Times really fast, in a way that, again, just would not have ever happened before, isn't happening for other people's briefs. And it's not because my briefs are that much better. It's just because that there's this pipeline where people are watching.
Yeah, and for the record, I've sent referrals to Rafi, and I've received referrals from people, and actually someone in our appellate Twitter community in another state actually became a firm client. So I mean, there are definitely hard results. There's a lot of whiffs, but that's sort of the nature of business development anyway. But sorry, Rafi.
Oh, no. Something Carl was saying popped something into my head. A couple of years ago, I gained a lot of followers on Twitter because I got involved with the Tom Brady, New England Patriots Deflategate issue. And I still have people who follow me just because they're football fans and they don't care about law at all. But sometimes I'll talk about sports law or something like that. And that, I think, illustrates another part of the experience on Twitter, which is that if you spend a relatively minimal amount of time educating yourself about something that you find interesting, and then just say stuff about that, you will be assumed to be some kind of expert by not just Twitter, but by media. And you will get, invitations to talk on the radio, talk in the newspaper. I appeared on Boston Sports Radio a few times in the middle of all that, which was amazing. There were all these people that were mad at me because I told them that arbitrations are extremely hard to overturn. And Tom Brady had been, punished by a arbitrator. And I would get emails from these Boston sports fans that were mad about, the deference due to arbitration in federal law. But the point of that is, if there's something you really care about, whether it's free speech or sports or whatever, food, whatever it is, if you just spend like a day thinking about it, and there's an important issue percolating out in the world, you can talk about it with authority and get attention. And sometimes that has bad consequences. You got to be careful, but it can really raise your profile and help your practice.
Something you all touched on, but not delved into deeply. What about the judges? I know there are a lot of trial court judges, appellate justices that are on appellate Twitter. Tell us about some of those interactions and relationships that you've formed.
I mean, it has been so surprising to me, the value of interactions. I mean, not just with Texas judges, but judges from around the country, who, some of whom I have developed a relationship with that, and these are not, judges in states where I've never practiced before and never will. Something comes up and they'll reach out or I'll reach out. There's a subject the quality of interactions, I think, it has been so surprising to me. And I will tell you now that if I'm going to argue or if I have a case in a court where I haven't been before, one of the first things I do is check Twitter to see if they're active. Not because I think they say anything inappropriate, but I think you can get a real sense of some of these judges' personalities and, the way some of them are so open, and they will talk about what they care about in their courts, what they like to see in briefs, what they don't like to see. I mean, Judge Dillard in Georgia is a really great example. If you look at his feed, you get a pretty clear picture of certain words and like punctuation things that he likes and does not like. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I think that a lot of judges are afraid to be active on Twitter, but I think you need to assume your judges are on Twitter. Just as an ethics moment, we talked about this on an ethics panel we did about social media. Don't talk about your cases, please, on Twitter. You would be shocked at what people will say. And I think that the casualness of Twitter sometimes lulls people into a sense of complacency and will say things they really ought not be saying, about juries, about conferences with judges, about depositions. We've seen people tweeting about, hey, I'm in a deposition and so just made a settlement offer. And I'm like, yay, don't do that. But it happens. I say all of that because it's great to know the judges and justices who are there, who engage. It's a wonderful thing. Justice Busby is another one. Justice Guzman's is very active. But there are a lot of justices who are on Twitter and you don't know it. And so govern yourselves accordingly, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I think Twitter can be a little bit of a cesspool in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at your average Twitter conversation, it's pretty terrible. And there are a few bright lights in the Twitterverse, and I think one of them is the interactions between the public, lawyers, and judges that you can do on Twitter. It's incredible. It's an access to justice thing that people can understand what their courts are doing. That the justices and judges get out there and talk about the way they try and do their work, because that's a hugely mystifying thing in our society, that people don't understand what judges do. They understand what politicians do, but they don't see the process. They don't understand it. And so I think they're a little bit afraid of it and distrustful of what judges do. And, I think when you add a lot of politics on top of that, it makes for a very unhealthy environment for our society. And I think having judges getting out there and talking about what they do really helps to strengthen, our society, our democracy. I think Kendall's right. It puts a responsibility on you when you're got followers who are judges. They may be the judge presiding in your case that you're talking about. They also they're going to form their opinion about you from what they see of you on Twitter. I mean, that might be 99% of what they ever see of you. Because other than a conference here or there, I'm not going to see those judges and justices. So it's an opportunity. It's also a curse. It's a dual-edged sword.
Yeah, let me add to the concept that both Carl and Kendall were talking about how the judges you're in front of may be on Twitter, but you don't know it. And I will say, all the stuff they said about how good it is to see the judges on Twitter is true. Absolutely. It's wonderful. I have great interactions. But you have to also remember that most of the judges you may be in front of, even in the federal courts, are somewhere on Twitter. And they are not there publicly, but they are reading it and they have views about what you might have said on your Twitter account. And let me tell an embarrassing story from 15 years ago to sort of illustrate that. I've been doing social media one kind or another for a long, long time. I had a law school blog in 2002 when I was at law school that I thought I was going to document my 1L a year and some kind of effect was going to come from that. But it didn't happen. So I did have a daily blog, and one day a prominent judge was at our law school and he gave a talk about some topic I don't remember anymore. And I blogged about it on my page. And a few days later, I got a call from the dean of my law school who said that the judge had read the blog and was upset because he disagreed and he wanted to write like a response on my blog because it had made him so upset. And what, of course, I did was apologize abjectly to the dean and to the judge, and I pulled down the post. And I never talked about it again until many years later. But that taught me, and I now always think that anything I say, it has to be as if I am saying it to the judge's face. And if I would not say it to that judge in person at a, whatever event, then I do not tweet it. That doesn't mean you can't write about the court you work in front of. I write about the Fifth Circuit. I point out places where the judges disagree or whatever, and maybe even that annoys them. I don't know. I've never gotten that feedback, but they are not things I wouldn't say to them if they asked me. So you just have to proceed with the assumption that they're reading everything you write.
Well, switching gears a little bit, Kendall, been a long-time follower of @LadyLawyerDiary and the hashtag #LadyLawyerDiaries. Why don't you talk a little bit about where that came from and why it's so critical, especially right now?
So, I mean, a lot of the origin story has to do with appellate Twitter, actually. The Lady Lawyer Diary is a handle on Twitter that is run by a decent sized group of women, some of whom are public, some of whom are not. Sort of a combination of in-house practicing private lawyers, government lawyers, and professors. The hashtag was actually coined by a professor at Temple University, Ellie Margolis, who is one of our admins, and Rachel Gurvich is another professor. She started using it on Twitter along with the community. And it just like appellate Twitter, it really was an organic community that started as a hashtag. It started, I think, it really dovetailed a lot with the Me Too movement. And, the legal profession, as I'm not saying anything new or controversial, but has had its challenges with pay gap, with gender discrimination, with, retention, diversity, inclusion, and in some cases, unfortunately, with issues regarding harassment. And one of the things that we learned through the hashtag was that there are a lot of people who want to share their stories or to raise issues or to discuss issues, but they were afraid to do so publicly. So we created the handle as a forum for us to. It's not. I mean, I would say every once in a while there's some advocacy on a specific issue. You may have seen some of that recently with respect to the bar exam. But really what we are is a curated forum where people can reach out, women followers, and it's not always women, but can reach out to us anonymously through direct message. And with their permission, if it's something we feel comfortable posting, like it doesn't put them at risk, there's not too much identifying information, we can post questions on their behalf to start a conversation. And it really blew up. I mean, Lady Lawyer Diary is one of these communities that that I think tapped into a need among women in the legal profession or legal adjacent to talk about things that in historically have not really been welcome discussions. And it's not just women, I mean, Rafi and Carl have been part of that community as well. We consider them to be, allies in many respects, which is important. So it's, I mean, there's been a lot written about it. There've been articles about it, which has been great. Again, not something any of us expected to, it was not like a deliberate, hey, we're going to do this businessy thing about women lawyers in the profession. That was not the plan. It was sort of in service to the community of women that we felt like were being underserved in their ability to talk about issues. And it tapped into something, I think, that was I think surprising to all of us, but very welcome.
Yeah, no, and I mentioned that it's in service. I appreciate everything that you guys do because I've been one of the anonymous direct messages where the community came through and provided some just brilliant advice and tips. So it's just a group.
And I think Lady Lawyer Diaries is important not only for the women of Twitter, but it's also really important for the dudes of Twitter. Because I think that even people who are think of themselves as right-minded and trying to do well can't really. It's hard to appreciate what women have to go through in the profession. And I think it's really cool to see what they're working through, and to see, I think you can see light bulbs going off all the time among men, being like, oh, that's kind of messed up what I do, and really changing behaviors. So I think it's really cool.
One other thing about maybe the experience of women on Twitter, and I don't mean to put words in Kendall's mouth or Whitney's mouth, but there are things I can say on Twitter because I'm a man that will not get me negative feedback. And if a woman were to say them, they would get negative feedback. And that is an unfortunate thing on Twitter that seems to me to be true. And so that is one reason why there is a Lady Lawyer Diaries, I think, to provide some solace or protection when those kind of misogynistic attacks occur. But also it's something I think women who are watching this and might want to participate on Twitter should keep in mind, that there is a problem that, you can say entirely innocuous things and be attacked by people, basically because you're a woman, that they would never say that to me. And so it's just something to keep in mind. Don't be afraid to use the block and mute buttons on Twitter, ways to shut down people who attack you. There is now an option where people can't respond to you, I think, on certain posts. You should use that. And I have friends who have used the tool of just going away for a while, when things get too difficult for them, and resting and coming back to Twitter later on. And those are all valid. You shouldn't feel like those are problems. Like, you should do that if it keeps you able to use the platform, because women experience things that men do not.
Yeah, we've turned some of those into mugs. So we have a hysterical lady brain mug. We have a sarcasm does not become you mug. We actually said sarcasm does become me mug. But I mean, it's astonishing what people will say to women in a public forum. I mean, we get called names. We get told to go home and make dinner. We get obscene pictures in direct messages. And I think that we try not to block unless it gets really bad, because we think it's important to shed a light on that kind of interaction for women. And women come to us when they experience that kind of interaction, and we sort of send out the bat signal, and the forum, not just us as the admins, but the whole forum is incredibly supportive, men and women, of women in that community when something like that happens. And I think there's a value there in exposing that kind of behavior for what it is, and then eventually blocking it, but doing a little public triage before we block. So.
And if I can say one more thing about Lady Lawyer Diaries, I think if you're watching this and wondering, whether to get on Twitter or not, and hearing some horror stories and wondering whether that's worthwhile, I think the question shouldn't be whether you get on. I think the question should be how, because I think it's an unalloyed good to be involved in the community and to be contributing to it. And I think that there are resources like Lady Lawyer Diaries that make it a lot safer and easier to get involved. And I do encourage people who are interested in getting on Twitter to do it by dipping their toe in the water a little bit at first and not jumping in, because again, you're very much on display. It can be frightening to get attacked, and the nature of social media and the viral phenomenons that kind of it fosters can be really scary. I mean, you can do all sorts of bad things. Bad things can happen to you. I'm assured you can get dirty pics in your DMs, and I that's not something I've experienced because I'm a man. It's just not something I have to worry about. But yeah, get involved and just stay close to some of the leaders. Like follow Rafi and stick close to him, and he's going to guide you through just fine.
I'm going to break in with a few questions from our chat. This has been a great discussion. So for someone who's trying to increase their presence on appellate Twitter, are there any specific tips you have how to do that? I mean, any types of engagements that would be good to get your feet wet in this process?
I have two suggestions. The first is reach out to one of us, and we love to introduce people to the appellate Twitter community. Be like, hey, this is so and so in such and such place. Check them out, that kind of thing. We're happy to do it if you're comfortable with that. That is not necessity, but that's one way to do it. I think all of us are very willing and happy to use our platforms that we've established to introduce other people to that community. That's part of what I think we all care about. The second thing is my advice: come out with a really hot take about commas or fonts and you'll set up a whole firestorm and everybody will know who you are within like 2 hours. I mean, I'm partially kidding, not entirely, but partially.
Okay, and go ahead. You had more thoughts.
One of the things that I did when I first started, well, actually I've got two thoughts. One of the things I did when I first started was I would just tag appellate Twitter, like the little hashtag, to something that I posted, because I didn't have a ton of followers at first, and that kind of boosts. That's kind of an automatic self-signal boost because there's people who just follow the hashtag and it jumps into their feed. And I think the other thing you can do is there's something that you know about law or appellate law, right, that somebody else doesn't know. Just you're the expert. You're the world, and with the Twitter platform, you're the world's expert on stay motions in New York District Court. You know, I mean, that's your thing. If you start talking about that, whatever that is, you shouldn't be afraid of it, because you really can't have a subject matter expertise that nobody else really has. Just start talking about it, and I think people are going to really find that useful, and that's going to be a source of positive interactions for you. If you jump on, Trump's latest tweet and you try and have some hot, funny take on that, that's bad. You should not do that to start out with, because you're going to get heaps of scorn piled upon you, and you're going to divide the appellate community in two, just regardless of what you do. So I would suggest starting with what you know.
I've got one thing to add to all that, which was excellent, which is that in terms of the structure of followers, there's a strategy there too. You cannot go and try to engage immediately with someone who has 100,000 followers. I mean, you can try and maybe they'll pay attention to you, but probably not. So what you want to do is discuss what you know with people who, let's say you have 500 followers. Maybe you should talk to a bunch of people who have 5,000 and 6,000 or 3,000 or whatever, and that'll introduce you into the community, because those are the people that are driving the discussion. The person who is doing this as a job with like 1 million followers, who cares about them? They're not, they're not the people you want to interact with. So, concentrate on talking to people that are just like you. They just happen to have more followers, and that will get you up to their level of followers. And then you have a bit of a megaphone to talk to people.
We have another question about what the cost-benefit analysis may be for in-house or government lawyers where their need to develop business is different from someone they don't have that same pressure as someone at a private firm. Any thoughts on using appellate Twitter or other social media for those lawyers?
So there is a hashtag. Sorry, Carl, you want to go?
No, go ahead.
There is a hashtag in-house Twitter, and you'll probably notice that it's a little bit less active. There are some people who are in-house counsel. I would say the majority of them are under anonymous handles. Like they identify themselves as in-house Twitter, and that they will post sort of anonymous suggestions to outside counsel a lot. They'll be like, PSA, if you're outside counsel, don't do X, Y, and Z. At which point every single person looks and is like, oh my gosh, make sure we haven't done that recently. I think that it is more risky, truth is. And from my perspective, for in-house Twitter, they have a single client. Anything about that could be connected to their company could be, is I think subject to a lot more scrutiny. no one should be talking about their clients on Twitter or social media unless it is something that the client has approved and wants out there, like a press release. But you shouldn't be talking about your client. So I think it's particularly fraught a little bit more for in-house counsel. But there are a number of them, and any one of us would be happy to help identify some of the really good in-house counsel who do tweet, and they talk about issues affecting their industry. They talk about legal developments. They speak on their personal views. So there's definitely a presence. I would say it's not as robust as the appellate Twitter community.
And I think that people who approach Twitter from the government or the in-house background, they would be doing it for different reasons. I mean, you're not necessarily trying to draw a ton of attention to the in-house counsel group at your company, but I think that from what I've seen, from the outside, those people seem to draw a lot of strength from each other. Like, they can discuss the kinds of problems that they're having in a way that they're not really able to do in the real world, again, and tidbits that they get from conferences. And they can talk about strategies, they can talk about dealing with, employees and things like that. And I think a way that's really productive. And I think also, not to plug myself in here, but, they can get to know good new lawyers that they might want to deal with. I mean, there's a lot of relationships that I think the three of us have had fostered through Twitter, because they get to know you. They say, well, Rafi's a guy who can be trusted. Kendall's a person who can be trusted. I like her. You can develop a relationship with people, and this is a relationship business. And so I think a lot of satisfactory relationships with outside counsel have been fostered through interactions on Twitter. So I think it's great for them too.
We have another question about whether any of you use Instagram, and do you find any benefit in that?
I could not even understand what it is. Be totally frank about it. I take it you put pictures of yourself and then say something pithy, but I don't get it. I am sure there's a lawyer who manages to do it well, but
who does it really well is Lauren Rad.
That's true.
But it's because it's centered around Instagram is usually centered more around like an interest. So Lauren has a massive, probably international following for knitting. She wrote this really fantastic thread about stop using go do your knitting as an insult, about the history of knitting. She's a lawyer as well, and one of the women who contributes to Lady Lawyer Diary. I think Instagram, like Molly, I actually got somebody tweeted they want to see Molly. Molly cannot come to the camera right now. I'm really sorry, but she is on Instagram, and I can't keep up with it. Yeah, I just can't. So sometimes if there's like a family thing or a very cute Molly thing or something, one of my artistic hobbies or fly fishing, I might post. But I think the last post was maybe like 8 months ago. So no, not for me, not regularly.
Well, I hate to ask, but I've just got to ask, what do you think about lawyer TikToks?
Though I will say, when Judge Emily Miskell did a few TikToks to introduce her court, I thought those were really good.
Yeah, they were.
But I would be so bad at it.
Yeah, I think somebody's going to do it really well one day, and it's not going to be me.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. There's an area for new development on social media. So,
yes,
you who are our viewers might want to, blaze new trails in that area. Well, I think that's it for our questions now. And I really want to thank our panelists for their time and for joining us with this really engaging discussion. And if you did miss a portion of it or you had to join late, you can use the same link to watch it again. Join us next month. We're having a program with Carl Ritter from Texas Lawyers Assistance Program, and he's talking about avoiding lawyer burnout in the coronavirus era. So an important topic. And but thank you again to all of you for joining, and we hope to see you again at the HBA.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.